The paradox of choice versus the paradox of no choice. Imagine two people are frozen. One is standing in a supermarket aisle with 200 types of cereal in front of her. She cannot decide. Her cart is empty. 10 minutes pass. She picks up a box, reads the label, sets it back down. She does this 4 times and still walks away with nothing. The other is standing in a prison cell. There is one door, one meal, one schedule, no choices at all. And yet he is also frozen, not choosing anything because there is nothing left to choose. He has stopped even looking toward the door. Two completely different worlds, two completely different amounts of freedom. And somehow both people end up in the exact same state. Today we are going to look at something strange sitting underneath modern life. We call it the paradox of choice. But there is a twin paradox almost nobody talks about, the paradox of no choice. And once you see how these two mirror each other, you will never look at freedom the same way again. This is the vortex of meaning. We assume more freedom equals more happiness. More options should mean a better life because we can pick exactly what suits us. That is the whole promise of modern society. More brands, more platforms, more paths, more everything. Entire industries are built on the idea that adding one more option is always a gift, but research and lived experience keep showing the opposite. When people are given too many options, they often feel more anxious, less satisfied, and more likely to regret whatever they pick. This is the paradox of choice. It is not that choice is bad. A small amount of choice genuinely does make life better. The problem starts once the number of options crosses a threshold the mind can no longer hold at once. Past that point, each additional option does not add freedom. It adds friction. Now flip it. In places with almost no freedom, no choice of career, no choice of partner, no choice of belief, we would expect people to at least feel calm. No decisions, no regret, no anxiety about picking wrong. If choice is the source of stress, then the absence of choice should be the source of peace. But that is not what happens either. In highly controlled, unfree environments, people often experience a different kind of paralysis. Not the anxiety of too many doors, but the despair of a single locked one. Motivation collapses, initiative disappears. People stop trying to decide anything, even in the small pockets of life where they technically still could. So somehow, both an overload of freedom and a total absence of freedom lead to the same destination, paralysis. That is the paradox inside the paradox. Why would two opposite conditions produce the same broken outcome? The answer lives in how the human mind processes decisions. Every decision charges your brain a small cognitive fee. It requires comparing options, predicting outcomes, and accepting the risk of being wrong. When there are too many options, the brain hits a kind of traffic jam. It cannot compare 200 cereals in a meaningful way, so it either shuts down or picks randomly and then feels regret afterward, wondering if one of the other choices was better. Think about the last time you opened a streaming app just to relax for an hour. You scroll. You read 10 descriptions. You start one thing, stop it after 2 minutes, scroll again. 20 minutes later, you have watched nothing, and somehow you feel more drained than when you started. That is not laziness. That is a mind flooded past its processing limit. There's a name for part of this. Researchers call it decision fatigue, the idea that the quality of our decisions degrades the more decisions we are forced to make in a row. By the time you reach choice number 30 of the day, your brain is no longer weighing options carefully. It is looking for the fastest possible exit, whether that exit is a random pick or simply giving up. Now think about someone on the opposite end, someone stuck in a rigid job where every decision, what to work on, when to take a break, how to do the task, has already been made by someone above them for years. At first they might push back, but after enough times of being overridden or ignored, most people quietly stop offering opinions at all, even when a new manager finally asks for their input. Not because they lack ideas, because their mind has already filed away, "This does not matter. Stop trying." Same paralysis, different door. But here is the part people miss. In an unfree environment, the mind does not simply relax because choices were removed. Instead, something called learned helplessness can take hold. This is a well-documented psychological pattern. When a being repeatedly experiences no control over outcomes, it eventually stops attempting to exercise control, even when a real opportunity appears later. So the prisoner is not paralyzed because he has no options. He is paralyzed because his mind has learned through repetition that trying does not matter. And the shopper is not paralyzed because she has no options either. She is paralyzed because her mind cannot process too many at once and defends itself by freezing. Same symptom, opposite root cause. Overload on one side, suppression on the other. Both disable the same internal muscle, the muscle of deciding. And here is what makes this so easy to miss in everyday life. Both forms of paralysis disguise themselves as something else. The overloaded shopper thinks she is simply indecisive by nature. The suppressed employee thinks he has just stopped caring about his job. Neither one recognizes it as the same underlying mechanism, because the surface conditions look like total opposites. Let's ground this in something real. Psychologist Barry Schwartz spent years studying how modern abundance affects well-being, and he argued that a society drowning in options can produce more anxiety than freedom. His work became one of the most cited explanations for why endless choice can quietly exhaust us rather than liberate us. He also drew a distinction that matters here between people who search until they find the objectively best option and people who simply pick something that is good enough and move on. The first group, on average, ends up less satisfied, even when their final choice is measurably better, because the act of searching itself plants the seed of doubt. Now consider the opposite extreme. Psychologist Martin Seligman ran experiments in the 1960s where subjects were placed in situations with no control over an unpleasant outcome. Later, even when control became available, many of them did not attempt to use it. They had already learned that effort was pointless. This became known as learned helplessness, and it has since been observed far beyond the laboratory in workplaces, relationships, and authoritarian systems where people stop pushing back long after change becomes possible. What makes Seligman's findings unsettling is not just that helplessness formed. It's that it outlasted the conditions that created it. The cage opened, and the animal stayed. The door unlocked, and the person did not test it. The mind, once it has been trained to expect failure, does not automatically retest reality when reality changes. It has to be deliberately retaught that trying is worth it again. The 19th century philosopher Soren Kierkegaard captured the emotional core of this centuries before modern psychology existed. He wrote about the dizzying feeling that comes from standing before possibility itself, describing anxiety as the dizziness of freedom. It is a strange thing to realize that freedom itself can feel like vertigo. Kierkegaard was not describing a rare pathology. He was describing something close to a universal experience, the vertigo that opens up the instant you realize a life could go any number of directions, and only one of them will actually happen. And on the other side, philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre argued that even a person in chains still retains an inner freedom to choose their attitude toward their situation. His point was that a truly unfree environment does not remove human agency completely. It only makes agency require far more conscious effort to locate. Sartre went further still, suggesting that people in free societies often manufacture false constraints for themselves, telling themselves a choice does not exist when it actually does, simply because owning that choice is frightening. He called this bad faith, the quiet lie we tell ourselves to avoid the weight of being free. So what is actually going on underneath both paradoxes? Here is the principle. Human beings do not need maximum freedom or minimum freedom. They need a workable amount of agency, something proportional to what the mind can actually process and act on. Too much freedom floods the system. Too little freedom starves it. In both cases, the person loses the felt sense that their choice matters, either because there are too many choices to matter individually, or because there are none left to matter at all. Philosophically, this connects to something deeper. Meaning does not come from the sheer quantity of options available to us. It comes from the relationship between a choice and a self that is doing the choosing. A meaningful choice requires enough options to reflect a real self, but not so many that the self drowns in comparison. And it requires enough constraint to make the choice feel consequential, but not so much constraint that the self disappears entirely. This is worth sitting with because it overturns a very common assumption. We tend to measure freedom the way we measure everything else in a consumer world, by counting. More flavors, more subscriptions, more career paths, more swipe options must mean more freedom, but a self does not grow by counting doors. It grows by walking through one and living with where it leads. Quantity of options and quality of agency are not the same axis, and once you separate them, a lot of modern anxiety starts to make more sense. We have engineered a world with historically unprecedented quantity of choice, while doing almost nothing to protect the quality of the self that has to do the choosing. So what do we actually do with this? First, in choice-heavy environments, deliberately shrink your option set before you decide. Give yourself 3 real candidates instead of 30. This alone restores a sense of control that overload destroys. You are not lowering your standards by doing this. You are protecting the part of your mind that actually has to live with the outcome. Second, set a decision deadline for low-stakes choices. A 5-minute cap on picking a restaurant protects your mental energy for decisions that actually matter. Treat your decision-making capacity like a battery with a limited charge each day, because functionally it behaves like one. Third, in constrained environments, look for the smallest available choice and treat it as real. Even choosing how you respond internally to a fixed situation is still a genuine act of agency, and repeatedly exercising it is what prevents learned helplessness from settling in. This might be as small as choosing which task to do first within a job that dictates everything else, or choosing your posture and attention in a conversation you cannot leave. The size of the choice matters less than the consistency of making it. Fourth, notice when you have quietly stopped trying to influence something, not because it is truly impossible, but because past failures trained you to expect it is impossible. That gap between what is actually fixed and what merely feels fixed is where most unnecessary paralysis lives. A useful habit here is to periodically retest old constraints on purpose, to ask again, has this actually stayed closed, or did I just stop checking the door? Notice something else about that second question. It works identically in both paradoxes. The overwhelmed shopper can use it to cut 200 options down to one that fits who she actually is. The person in the rigid, low-choice environment can use the exact same question on the one small decision still available to them. It does not require abundance to function, and it does not get lost in abundance either. That is what makes it the load-bearing idea of this whole video. We tend to think freedom and confinement are opposites, one good, one bad, sitting at two ends of a line. But the paradox of choice and the paradox of no choice reveal something quieter and stranger. Both extremes produce the exact same inner experience, the collapse of felt agency, which means the real enemy was never too much freedom or too little freedom. The real enemy is the loss of a self that believes its choices matter, and that belief can survive in a crowded supermarket aisle, and it can survive in a locked room, because it was never actually located in the number of doors around you. It was always located in whether you still consider yourself someone who chooses. That is the vortex underneath the paradox. Not choice itself, but the quiet, ongoing decision to remain a chooser, no matter how many or how few doors are left standing in front of you. Freedom is not measured by the number of open doors. It is measured by whether the person standing before them still believes they can walk